Hello everyone, this is Spliced, and today I'm going to be talking about how I get my unfriggenbelievables in Warzone or Halo 5 in general. This has probably been the most requested thing to be featured on my channel because a lot of you are really in search and in need of ways to get unfriggenbelievables fast and easy, or just get them in general. And I totally understand that I should have made this video earlier, but the reason why I didn't is simply because I had no way at all to make it. I just didn't really know how I could simply say how to get an unfriggenbelievable, because believe it or not, when I play, I just play. I don't really have any plan most of the time, unless if I have like specific things I want to go for certain vehicles or weapons or whatever, then I'll have a plan for it. But I really had to take a step back and actually look at my own gameplays as well to figure out myself how I get unfriggenbelievables. And I'm going to try to break it down for you guys. I'm not saying as a fact this is how you get an unfriggenbelievable. This is how I get mine. So I want you guys to separate those two things first and foremost, because getting an unfriggenbelievable or just getting a high streak in general is not really necessarily a formula type thing. It's mostly about playstyle, some luck is involved, and some skill, of course. But so I'm just going to be explaining how exactly I get my unfriggenbelievables for certain things. And since most of my unfriggenbelievables come from vehicles, I'm going to be mostly focusing on that. So pretty much, like, the way I get an unfriggenbelievable, maps aside and vehicles aside, when I play the game, depending on how well the game is going in the beginning is when I decide whether or not I'm going to be pushing for some sort of gameplay. And this gameplay in the background was an unused vehicle duo because I forgot to record the theater mode or bookmark the map, so I can't go back in theater mode and record it. I only saved the actual gameplay of it. So this is unused vehicle duo of the Wasp and the Oni Scorpion, for those who wanted to know what this was. It's just random gameplay in the background for you guys to watch. But essentially what I do is I pretty much just, at the beginning of the game, when I see potential for gameplay, let's say I get to a high rec very, very fast and I didn't die, then there is potential because I already have some sort of a streak going already, and I have the recs to spawn a vehicle to help me ramp up more kills. And the reason why I like the early game more than anything is because during the early game, depending on how ahead you are, will determine what the enemies have to counter you. And if you can ramp up really, really easily in the early game for whatever you're spawning, the enemies don't really have much counters toward you, so you can get some pretty easy kills, as they will mostly be sitting with loadout weapons still, and they won't have anything to take you out. So you can pretty much go in face to face with a lot of enemies and just take them out without any worry, because you know that they won't really have anything to take you out. If you're using a very weak air vehicle or ground vehicle in the beginning, such as a Wasp or a Ghost, and you're going for an unfriggenbelievable with those kind of vehicles, you really want to value yourself in the early game and get as many kills as possible, mainly because later in the game it's going to be much harder for you to take out enemies, simply because there's going to be a lot more countering vehicles and weapons towards you, because everyone's going to have their recs at that time. So that's just one of the examples that I go for. I wait for opportunities to go for unfriggenbelievables. I don't go for them every game, because if I were to do that, I would only stress myself out and I would get very, very frustrated with the game, because a lot of the time games don't go the way I want them to, and people will probably tend to believe that I can get an unfriggenbelievable every single game, which is not true. There's lots of games where I get completely destroyed. There's other games where the enemy team are just prepared to take me out. And just as a personal view, I get recognized sometimes, and people just focus me the entire game, which makes it very, very difficult for me to do stuff, especially with very weak vehicles such as ghosts, gun gooses, all that kind of stuff. The other thing I want to mention is ground vehicles and air vehicles. For those who do not know, air vehicles have a massive advantage compared to ground vehicles from the one main thing that ground vehicles suffer, and that is lack of freedom of movement, I guess you could say. There's a lot of things that can counter ground vehicles because a lot of them are really slow, and they're limited on the field that is given for the maps. Another thing is camo. As everyone knows, camo can easily counter any and all ground vehicles that are slow moving, such as the heavy and somewhat medium vehicles, because all you need is camo. You crouch, walk up to a tank, and you can board it, and it's dead. That's all you need. And so that's pretty much it with those things as well. So most of my unfriggenbelievables come from Banshees. And the reason why most of them come from Banshees, aside from the fact that the Banshee, in my opinion, is the best vehicle in the game, is it's also my favorite. I love the Banshee more than anything in this game, and I have since like Halo 3, Halo 1. I just found myself to be attached to this vehicle, and I found the more I played with it, the more I understood all of its mechanics, everything there is to know about the vehicle. So I was able to use it to my advantage when Halo 5 came out to start ramping up unfriggenbelievables really, really early on, before people could recognize me and before people really understood the game and the maps. I could get on top of that, and I could start getting a lot of kills, because most of the time the enemies didn't really know what was going on. I can still get a fair amount of unfriggenbelievables now, but it is definitely a lot harder because there's a lot more countering weapons, there's a lot more intelligent players, not so much casual players anymore, which is completely fine. I just have to simply change my playstyle and attune myself to not be too reckless anymore and just be more aware. And that's the other thing I want to talk about is awareness. Awareness is by far the biggest thing when it comes to getting an unfriggenbelievable, in my opinion. So to explain awareness, it's very, very simple, but a lot of people can simply ignore it, and I've noticed a lot of people ignore it, especially when they're in vehicles or air vehicles as well. Awareness is knowing what is around you and what threats are in your area and what threats are facing you when you're using a vehicle. So for example, let's use a wasp, okay? So let's say you're using a wasp and you're focusing an enemy, but you are in the open. There is a very, very high chance that anyone could grab a plasma pistol, a Spartan laser, a railgun, Hydra, any of those anti-air weapons, and simply just shoot you out of the sky. You will have no cover. You will have no way of getting behind cover because a wasp does not have any boost or anything it needs to get behind cover really quickly. So because of that, since you're in open air and you're very, very vulnerable, you can get taken down very easily. There are a lot of other things that factor into awareness, but that is one of the main things that I want to touch up on is the average player that uses an air vehicle, usually, or a ground vehicle, usually, they just look for kills and they don't look for safety at the same time. When I play with vehicles, I always prioritize safety over aggression. Unless if I'm going for multi-kills, which sometimes you guys do see me go for multi-kills, and 9 times out of 10 when I do go for multi-kills, it's always a huge mistake, and I find myself getting really, really damaged with my vehicle, and I end up losing it, or it is just a waste of armor that I just gave up for no reason because I wanted to get that extra few kills. If you really set your mind to get an unfriggenbelievable or really high streak, you will want to prioritize staying alive. Sometimes, and a lot of times, I get opportunities to kill enemies, but what I have to do is I have to go away from the cover of safety, and that comes with risks, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave it. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave these enemies behind. Just know that if you're going to go for these enemies and go for the kills, make sure that the other enemies that are around aren't able to counter you very easily, because there's a lot of times when there are some enemies that decide, you know what, I don't like this enemy vehicle being on the battlefield for too long, I'm going to start spawning weapons to try to take it out. And that's completely fine, it's completely understandable. These enemies are going to want to take you out because you've been killing them for so long and you're still alive, so they're going to start spawning Spartan lasers, and that's when you have to start getting really attentive. You have to have good awareness for these enemies that are going to start focusing you. So always want to prioritize staying alive, but at the same time, if you just try to stay alive and you don't go for any kills, you're not going to get the unfreaking believable. So you need a balance. You need to be aggressive in certain areas, and you need to be defensive when you know that the enemy is going to try to go after you. Being in a wasp, out of all things, is probably one of the hardest things to stay alive in, if you're not counting the ground vehicles such as ghosts and gun gooses and stuff like that. The reason why is because they have no boost to get behind cover. They are very easily taken out of the sky when you're in open air. When you're getting shot at by a Hydra or a railgun, there's no way for you to get away from it unless if you're already next to cover. And the main thing that usually takes out wasps are enemy banshees, and these are things that come later in the game, and that's when you have to prioritize killing enemies early on. And that's why I try to prioritize killing enemies as soon as I can before they start getting their really strong weapons and vehicles to take me down. So the main thing for staying alive, the main thing for getting an unfreaking believable, in my opinion, is staying alive, using your awareness, knowing where all the enemies are, what they have, and what they might be able to spawn to take you out. Another thing is defensive aggression. This is another thing I tend to rely on sometimes. Instead of always trying to hide from the power weapons and vehicles, sometimes I push directly to the enemy power weapons and vehicles, because the last thing an enemy would suspect most of the time is for a weak enemy vehicle, or just a vehicle who's trying to stay alive in the long run, to push the enemy unexpectedly. And a lot of the time I like to wait for an opportunity, a very good opportunity, to rush the person who has a Spartan laser railgun, or sometimes rush the enemy banshee, as long as they're not like hiding behind their side of the field as well. That's another thing I want to note as well, is never push the enemy side unless if you are 100% certain that you have teammates to help you out, or that the enemy is not prepared for you. I'll give you an example. If you have Fortress and the East Armory on Skirmish at Darkstar, and they have West Armory, and they have Banshees over there, they have Spartan lasers over there, they have railguns over there, you would not want to push that if your teammates are not over there distracting them or pushing with you. If you go over there if you go over there alone, I can guarantee that you're going to die and you're not going to keep your streak. There is many different scenarios I could point out for you guys, but that would be too long for a video. So just in the general sense, you never want to push an enemy base unless if you have teammates to push with you. So that is that note as well. And the other note I want to talk about is your third-person view with vehicles. This is a very huge point to mention, and it goes in par with awareness somewhat. So third person, as you know, when you get into a vehicle, you have third-person view. And the difference between first person and third person is the ability to look over objects when you're behind them. And this can help so much for so many things that I think it is one of the most important roles in getting an unfriggin' believable for vehicles, is using your third person view to make sure that when you're behind cover, you can see what the enemies have and you can see where they are. So if you position your reticle on the screen just right and you pop out, you can shoot them immediately without them having any chance to react whatsoever. And I use that a lot. I prioritize third-person view a lot to take out enemies. So that is one of the quick important notes I want to mention. There's not much else to talk about on that topic, but there is another one I do want to talk about, and that is the radar. Every so often, every like 5 seconds, I would say, you would want to look onto your radar. Just a quick glance to see if anyone is walking towards you. This is for ground vehicles mostly, of course. So for tanks, wraiths, mantises, enemies tend to try to hijack you very, very often. Sometimes they bring plasma pistols, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they bring camo, sometimes they crouch. There are so many times when enemies are going to try to hijack you because you're a big, vulnerable vehicle, and also ground-heavy vehicles give a lot of wrecks when you destroy them, for those who do not know. So that is just one of the things to note about that. Now I'm going to talk about ground vehicle unfriggenbelievables. Now this one requires quite a bit of luck, honestly. So the luck factor comes into if the enemy has camo or not. If the enemy doesn't spawn camo, then you have to rely on enemy positioning and your positioning. If you aren't positioned right on the map, for example, if you're positioned next to a hill or an armory or anything of that sort where an enemy can jump from the top and hijack you, or an enemy can just come around the corner and hijack you, that is a huge problem for staying alive. You want to make sure you have good distance between a lot of entrances and routes for enemies to get behind you to hijack you. And you might be thinking that getting an unfriggenbelievable with a tank is not too hard because they're very, very powerful, especially the Oni and Hannibal Scorpion. And that's where you can be wrong, because the tank in general is a very big and slow moving vehicle, so you're extremely vulnerable to so many things that can take you out, especially from a distance and like from safety. They can pop out, shoot you with a rocket, and then pop behind cover immediately, and you won't even have time to move away from it because of how slow your vehicle moves. This goes in par with Banshee shots, Spartan lasers, rockets, railguns, hydras. There's so many things that can hit you that you can't hit back because you can't respond fast enough for you to kill enemies with tanks and stuff like that. So there really isn't much else to say about ground vehicles, honestly. That's all I really wanted to talk about. They don't have much going for them while camo is still a thing, because camo is, you just can't counter it. It's unfair, and it really needs some sort of change for ground vehicles to even have a chance. And even if camo wasn't even in the game, air vehicles would still be superior simply because they're in the air and you have that field of view. You could see everything, and that helps a ton for getting kill streaks. So the other thing I want to talk about is map awareness and just map knowledge in general. So in the beginning, I talked about how to prioritize getting kills in the early game when you get ahead of the enemy. But there's also knowing what to do in the maps that you're in. And I'm not really going to go into specific maps, but just in general, just for the general sense, from my personal experience, what I like to do is, as soon as I get to 3 wrecks, I like to spawn a wasp or a random vehicle or a ghost. Just try to get those fast, mobile, early game vehicles, and I try to get as many kills as possible with it. I always go to the middle objective of the map, such as, for example, in Apex, the Spire, but I don't want to face them face first. So what I like to do is I go behind the enemy line. I go through the cave or I go through the beach, and typically I shoot the enemies from behind. It gives me a good advantage on getting some free kills. Also, you want to prioritize boss spawns, of course. So bosses spawn in the first 2 minutes of the map, and you want to go to those bosses, not necessarily to kill them. You can kill them, of course. You want to get them if you have the choice. But if there's enemies going towards it, you want to prioritize those enemies first, because even though the bosses give more points, they don't give the kills for the kill streaks. So if you want to prioritize that unfriggenbelievable, you'll start getting those kills first, prioritize the boss second. If you have an opportunity in between, then of course you want to go for it. So that is map knowledge in general, in the general sense. There is specific things to do for each map, but those would all just be personal preferences, which I don't really think matters that much, because the way I play is a lot different than anyone else that plays. Everyone who plays is a lot different than everyone else, of course, so they have their own experiences, their own ways of playing. This is just my personal way of playing, honestly. So the last topic to touch up on is priority. Priority is probably the main thing for me, in my opinion, the most important thing for me. Priority is pretty much prioritizing enemies and enemy threats to take out. This, of course, is all specific depending on what vehicle you're using or what weapon you're using, what map you're on. All these things come together, but to rank it from greatest to least, the biggest threats would most likely be lasers, enemy banshees, and just like really fast moving vehicles that are a threat. Like there are photons. Photons can be a threat, not so much though, because they're very easy to counter. Enemy hydras, railguns, arc lights especially. These are big priorities that you want to focus on taking out immediately. As soon as you see an enemy with it, if you have the opportunity to take them out, make that opportunity a reality and take out these threats as soon as possible, because the longer you wait to take them out, not only do they remain a threat on the battlefield and harder for you to maneuver around the battlefield with these in the game, but also more people could be getting them as well, and then it makes it that much more harder for you to stay alive. So priority is by far the most important thing to get an unfriggenbelievable, in my opinion. You want to take out these big threats as soon as possible before it becomes too big of a problem for you. So that's really all I have to say about getting an unfriggenbelievable. In all honesty, guys, it's mostly about playstyle and how you play the game, and with some luck involved for how many enemies decide to take you out and how aggressive they are. As long as you are trying to be defensive and use your awareness and prioritize a lot of those threats, you should be okay. But like I said, for the most part, I don't go for unfriggenbelievables every single game. It's only when I have the opportunity to go for them, of course. I don't really have much else to say. This is just exactly how I get my unfriggenbelievables. This is just how I do it. It just comes naturally, I guess. There isn't really much else to say. I don't really have a plan to get unfriggenbelievables. I just play the game, and whenever I think a certain vehicle would be good at a certain time, I go for it. It's mostly about memory, guys. Just start using vehicles and weapons and see which one works with each map, and go from there. Honestly, I don't really know what else there is to say about this. That's why I had such a hard time making this video, because in my opinion, I just don't think there's a specific way to get an unfriggenbelievable or to get a high streak in general. It's mostly just memory and just awareness in general, and just the will to get an unfriggenbelievable, I guess. Just the ability to want to stay alive and push for those unfriggenbelievables. So that's all I have to say about this video. This was not scripted. I just came up with this in my own mind. This is what I truly feel. So hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys later.